It is June 28, 1914. A car takes a wrong turn on a narrow street in Sarajevo. Inside sits Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. A young man steps off the curb, 6 shots, 2 hit their mark. Within an hour the Archduke and his wife are dead. What started World War I? Most of us learn it was this single gunshot. But the real story is far stranger. That gunshot didn't start a war. It started a countdown. And the countdown could have stopped at almost any point along the way. It didn't. And the reason it didn't reveals something about how the world actually breaks. Let's start with the man who fired the shots. His name was Gavrilo Princip, 19 years old, a Bosnian Serb nationalist who wanted Bosnia free from Austro-Hungarian rule. He was part of a group called the Black Hand, a secret nationalist organization with ties, murky and disputed even today. The figures inside Serbia's own military intelligence. The plot to kill Franz Ferdinand had nearly failed hours earlier. A bomb thrown at his motorcade missed, wounding bystanders instead. Princip, by most accounts, wasn't even expecting a second chance. He got one anyway purely by accident when the Archduke's driver took a wrong turn straight past the cafe where Princip happened to be standing. Here's the part that surprises people. Assassinations of royalty weren't rare in 1914. In the decades before, an American president, a French president, an Austrian empress, and a Russian Tsar had all been murdered. The world had absorbed shocks like this before and moved on. So why was this one different? Why did a regional killing in a city most Europeans couldn't find on a map end up killing 17 million people? The answer isn't the bullet. It's what happened in the 5 weeks after it. Austria-Hungary wanted to punish Serbia, whom they blamed for harboring the plot. But Austria-Hungary alone wasn't strong enough to be sure of winning a war against Serbia and its powerful ally, Russia. So Vienna did something that, in hindsight, set the whole machine in motion. It asked Germany for backing, and Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II gave it. Historians call this moment the blank check. Germany told Austria-Hungary, whatever you decide to do, we will stand behind you. No conditions, no limits. Think about what that really meant. A leader in Berlin, without knowing exactly what Austria-Hungary would do next, promised unconditional support for it anyway. Would the war have happened without that one guarantee? We can't know for certain, but almost every historian agrees, without the blank check, Austria-Hungary likely backs down. With it, Austria-Hungary feels safe enough to escalate. There's something else worth pausing on here. Kaiser Wilhelm gave that guarantee, and then, days later, left for his annual yachting holiday in Norway. The man whose promise had just made a European war more likely was, for nearly 3 weeks, sailing the fjords, largely out of contact, while his own foreign ministry quietly pushed Austria-Hungary toward confrontation in his name. How much of what followed happened because the one person who might have hesitated simply wasn't in the room to hesitate, so the machine escalates. On July 23rd, nearly a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary delivers an ultimatum to Serbia. 10 demands, most of them Serbia could accept without losing face. But one demand goes further. Austrian officials would be allowed inside Serbia to help investigate the plot themselves. That crossed a line no independent nation could cross without giving up something of its own sovereignty. Serbia accepted almost everything. It hesitated only on that one point, and that hesitation was treated as a rejection. Here's where it gets strange, and where most people's understanding of the story quietly runs out. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28th, exactly 1 month after the killing. But Russia, bound by an old alliance to protect Serbia, its fellow Slavic nation, began mobilizing its army. Not attacking, just mobilizing, moving troops toward its own borders as a defensive precaution. But here's the twist that almost nobody remembers from school. In 1914, mobilization itself was treated as an act of war, not because armies were already fighting, because of train schedules. Germany's military plan for a two-front war, known as the Schlieffen Plan, depended on speed. If Russia mobilized, Germany believed it had to strike France first fast, before Russia's slower army could fully assemble. The plan left almost no room for patience. Once Russia's trains started moving soldiers toward the border, German generals argued there was no time left to wait and see what Russia intended. The machine had to be started, or it would lose its only advantage. Every European power, it turned out, had spent the previous decade drawing up war plans built entirely around railway timetables, precise schedules for exactly which regiment boarded which train on which day. Adjust the plan even slightly, and generals warned, the entire army might arrive at the front half assembled, and unable to fight at all. The technology built to move nations toward peace and trade just as easily became a machine that once switched on, refused to be switched back off. So Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st, then on France on August 3rd, a country that hadn't even mobilized yet, simply because the war plan assumed France would join anyway. German troops marched through neutral Belgium to reach France faster, and that single act, violating Belgian neutrality, a guarantee Britain had promised to defend decades earlier, is what finally pulled Britain into the war on August 4th. Read that sequence again. A killing in Sarajevo, an unconditional promise from Berlin, an ultimatum crafted to be rejected, a mobilization built on train timetables no one wanted to slow down, a war plan too rigid to pause, and a treaty from 1839 that nobody in 1914 expected to matter anymore. Every one of these was, on its own, a small and almost reversible decision. Together, they became irreversible. But we still haven't answered the deeper question. Why didn't anyone stop it? Some tried. Britain's Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, spent the final week of July desperately proposing a conference of the great powers to defuse the crisis peacefully. Kaiser Wilhelm himself, reading Serbia's conciliatory response to the ultimatum on July 28th, reportedly said it removed every reason for war and urged Austria to simply occupy Belgrade temporarily as a guarantee, not launch a full invasion. Tsar Nicholas II and Kaiser Wilhelm, cousins who called each other Nicky and Willie in personal telegrams, exchanged messages pleading for restraint even as their armies mobilized beneath them. So why didn't any of it work? Because by the final week of July, decisions had already outpaced the decision-makers. Military mobilization plans, once triggered, were nearly impossible to partially reverse. Germany's own Chief of Staff, Helmuth von Moltke, told the Kaiser that a partial mobilization, just against Russia, without touching France, was logistically impossible. The trains were scheduled down to the timetable. Change one, and the entire plan collapsed into chaos, leaving Germany vulnerable on both fronts at once. The generals, not the diplomats, effectively held the final word. And the generals were working from plans drawn up years earlier, built for a different, faster kind of certainty than the crisis actually needed. Sir Edward Grey later said something that has stayed with historians ever since. Standing at his office window in London on the evening of August 3rd, watching the street lamps being lit outside, he reportedly remarked that the lamps were going out all over Europe, and that none of them would see them lit again in their lifetime. He was not exaggerating. He understood, in that single quiet moment, that something had already been decided that no speech, no telegram, and no treaty could now undo. That's the counterintuitive twist most people never learn. World War I wasn't started by any single villain plotting global conquest. It was started by a system so tightly interlocked, so dependent on rigid alliances and even more rigid train schedules, that once one piece moved, no one could figure out how to make it stop without looking weak, without losing the advantage, without breaking a promise made years before to a country that might not even ask for help. Fewer than 5 weeks passed between a bullet in Sarajevo and armies crossing borders across an entire continent. 5 weeks. And none of the men making decisions in that window truly believed, until nearly the very end, that they were choosing a war that would kill more people than any conflict in human history to that point. By the time the guns actually opened fire, the 4 years and roughly 17 million dead that followed were still unimaginable to almost everyone who had just made them possible. So what actually caused World War I? Not one cause. A chain of individually rational decisions that added up to something none of the decision-makers wanted. Austria-Hungary wanted a short punitive war against Serbia, not a continental catastrophe. Germany wanted to support its only reliable ally, not to conquer Europe. Russia wanted to protect a smaller Slavic nation, not to bleed an entire generation of young men into trenches. Britain wanted to honor an old treaty, not to fight for 4 years. Each step made sense to the people taking it. It was only the sum of the steps that became a war nobody had actually chosen. There's a phrase historians still argue over. Did Europe slide into war, or did it walk in, eyes open? The evidence suggests something in between. Leaders saw the risk. Some, like Grey and even Wilhelm in his more hesitant moments, saw it clearly enough to try to stop it. But every off-ramp required someone to move first, to de-escalate first, to risk looking weaker than a rival who might not de-escalate back. And in a system built entirely on the assumption that hesitation equals danger, Nobody was willing to be the first to hesitate. We still build systems like that today. Financial markets that crash not because of one bad decision, but because thousands of individually rational trades cascade past the point anyone can stop them. Diplomatic standoffs, where both sides know de-escalation is smarter, yet neither wants to move first. Supply chains so interlinked that one disruption ripples through industries with no single person able to intervene in time. Even something as ordinary as a highway traffic jam follows the same pattern. One driver taps the brakes, the next overreacts. And within minutes, thousands of individually sensible decisions have locked an entire road into gridlock nobody chose and nobody can immediately undo. The mechanisms have changed. The underlying pattern, individually reasonable decisions locking together into a collective disaster nobody actually chose, has not. So when we ask what started World War I, the honest answer isn't a bullet, a treaty, or a telegram. It's the space between them. The moment after moment where someone could have paused and didn't, because the system made pausing feel like the most dangerous move of all. It is June 28th, 1914 again, in our minds, a car taking a wrong turn on a narrow street in Sarajevo. Only now we know the wrong turn wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was everything afterward that nobody knew how to stop.